Assistant GM for the Mariners, Andy McKay, joining us right now on the Emerald Queen Casino Sportsbook Hotline. Andy, we are inching closer to the draft, and I know this has been a months and probably years-long process for you guys when it comes to keeping your eye on things. But now that we are inching closer to Sunday and things are maybe really heating up, I'm guessing, what's the last couple days or even few weeks been like?
You know, it's a lot of information, and you have to. We've built our draft room. We've been in there for about 10 days, I think, maybe a little bit longer. It really comes down to managing all of the information that's in front of you. And that information is coming from our scouts on the road. Our scouts, I have to give them a shout out for just the incredible work they do. They've done it year in and year out, and that is really hard work, really hard travel. So you've got your eyes that are at the games, and then you've got our medical people who have to make assessments. Mental skills who have to make assessments, the in-house meetings, the biomechanical breakdowns, the statistical analytical breakdowns from our analysts. You know, you put it all together and you do your best to line them up the best that you can. It's a really hard process, but I'm confident in what we're doing and excited for what ends up happening for us in this draft.
Hey, in other sports, there are rumors that organizations are in communication about prospects and maybe making some moves. Is that the same situation with you guys, or is it kind of tunnel vision, we're doing our own thing, no communication needed?
Well, it's different in the other sports where they're trading draft picks, which we don't do in baseball. So, you know, there's very little communication, and there's always kind of the informal, you know, there's a friend that works for the Orioles or someone's got a friend who works for the Dodgers, and maybe they're having an organic conversation. But I think for the most part, people keep it pretty close. And we all know that, you know, we're all looking at the same basic pool of players. You know, it's rare that you're really shocked with somebody else's pick.
I don't think you're right, end up being shocked with, you know, who goes in the top 3, 4, 5. But we were all shocked to see the Mariners having a pick there. It was really cool, a really pleasant surprise. What's that process like, Andy? Is it like, you know, you might think, we're probably going, 15, 16, maybe 17. All of a sudden you find out you're 3. Do you just like throw away scouting reports and go, we're in a different world here?
You know, it's really interesting. And that was one of the coolest moments we've had as a group and at the winter meetings. And like you said, you're like, maybe we'll get lucky and move up a few spots. And, you know, it just kept going and kept going and kept going. And, you know, to end up with the 3rd pick is just a huge gift. And hopefully we do well with it because we don't plan on getting to pick there again. You know, and historically, you know, the players that you're getting at the top end of the draft I think they can be really impactful to your organization in different ways. And so we're thrilled about it. But at the same time, I realized where we drafted Cal Raleigh. I realized where we drafted Logan and George and where we got Brian Wu from or Bryce Miller. And they're good players all over the draft. And you just have to attack every pick like it is the 3rd pick in the draft because there's value everywhere and there's some great players and you always have to keep that in mind.
As technology advances, I'm sure you guys have a bunch of data and information on players all across the country and the world. What's the earliest someone has come to the table and say, let's look at this 12-year-old? Like, what's the earliest you guys start looking at guys?
Guys, check out my kid.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting in the international space every day where, you know, our international scouts are, you know, mostly centered around South America and Central America and through the Dominican. And they are evaluating and having to make decisions on really young players and forming those relationships. And I can't even imagine how hard that would be. But the world has changed. And, you know, most of these, it's certainly like the high school players that you talk to right now, you know, the premium players, most of them made commitments to colleges in 7th and 8th grade. Luckily, we don't have to do that. We can give it another 5 years before we have to make a decision. But, you know, across the industry, that age is going down. But to answer your question specifically, no, there are no scouting reports in our system on 12 and 13-year-olds in the United States right now.
Just do hobbies, Fortnite. You know, kids are into other stuff now. I guess I should change it. Andy, I read a really cool feature on Yahoo Sports, and they were looking at not just the draft process when it came to Cal and Logan, but their relationship and kind of how they developed. And it was a long read with tons of awesome insight. And they had some interviews with folks in your front office. And one of the things that stood out to me is that you guys were obviously high on Logan and you knew that you really liked him, but it kind of started with maybe 1 or 2 people, it sounds like, going like, hey, Cal could be pretty good. And then by the end of the process, the article made clear you guys were like, we think he might be the best catcher in this draft. And like, we're really high. Has there been someone else like that you guys have in your system now where maybe it starts as just one or two scouts going, hey, I'm just going to propose, I'm going to throw this name out. And then by the end, you guys just felt completely differently about him?
Absolutely. And I think to some extent, every case begins like that. Every case begins with an area scout, somebody who's in charge of, Southern California, or somebody who's in charge of the Pacific Northwest, writing a report, raising the flag, saying, hey, I think this is something we need to start diving into as a group. They all start that way to some extent. I can think of a couple of, Ben Williamson, our third baseman. That was a little bit out of nowhere, obviously a small school. The one person raised their hand and said, we really need to be diving into this player. And I remember very clearly, this might be the best defensive infielder in the entire draft. As the information kept coming and we kept digging, there's a reason why we drafted him where we did. And he's been a huge part of stabilizing our infield and, playing third base, playing it quite well for us. And so that was just one person whose diligence of continuing to look and search and be creative and ended up being a great pick for us.
Hey, we know talent comes from everywhere, right? And in football, that's my background. We always look at California, Texas, and Florida to start. Those are the three, in Georgia, the states that produce the most football players. Is there a certain region that produces the most baseball players, or a certain type of player, a pitcher, outfielder, or is it pretty just random?
No, I do think that those demographics do matter. And probably not so much by position, but just like you said, you're likely going to find more players in Southern California than you're going to find in Maine. Texas has a strong track record for developing players. Florida, just warm weather, places in the South. And, and that's why you're probably not going to have a ton of scout power, in New England compared to the state of Texas. But at the same time, you still have to honor talent does come from everywhere. And I've done a lot of home visits this year, and I've been to some remote places to do them. You do have to keep that in mind that there are really good players. There's big leaguers from everywhere, and although there might be more in Southern California, it doesn't mean that you're not going to find somebody in the upper Midwest at times.
What does it take to take a player off the board? Like maybe you initially really like them, you're pretty high on them, and there has to be something that I guess I'm asking Andy because I'm curious about the on the field skill things that you guys really value and where that comes into play.
I think everybody has a different, there's lines that just can't be crossed, right? And I think every organization might look at that a little bit differently, but we certainly have them. And then there's gray areas where, okay, we're not really excited about this particular incident or
like a personality trait. Yeah.
Yeah. But we want to talk about it. I'll give you a great example from the combine this year. And I won't get too specific for you, but it was a player who made a pretty stupid mistake. And it went viral. It was an incredibly bad choice by the player. So I asked him about it directly. His explanation, apology, and just true regret and remorse for what he had done and how it had impacted people around him. Yeah. I actually walked away feeling better about him than if he'd never actually done it, because it was such a mature and heartfelt, genuine apology. And so you have those situations too. I'm a big believer in second chances, and I'm a big believer in, we've all done things that we probably wish we hadn't done. So you just kind of have to dig in, and you have to, understand it. Is it a one-time thing? Is this kind of a continuing pattern? You have to get very individualized with it.
And it sounds like, you're drafting young men, 18, 19-year-olds, and they are going to make mistakes. What kind of resources do you have for these guys? Some of these guys are going to get a whole bunch of money at one point. You talk about the mistakes that they've made, finances. Like, what type of resources do you provide for these young men?
Almost everything you could imagine, both on the field and off the field. And then obviously they're all going to have their advisors and their agents. I've spent most of my life coaching teenagers, 18, 19, 20-year-olds. They're just like kids, and you understand there's very predictable things that they might do when they come across money, or they come across fame, or they come across, their lifestyle changing for them. And all of our coaches are very well versed in this, and they're very proactive about just engaging these topics and engaging these conversations and trying to prepare guys for, if you look at like what Cal Raleigh is going through right now. I mean, his life has been turned upside down, and you look at the demands on his private life and his time away from the ballpark and the pressures of success. And this was not part of Cal's package 2 years ago and 3 years ago, but hopefully along the way you're equipping him with the skills to help him navigate, the impacts of fame. I'm proud of our group because we are very proactive in trying to prepare people that way.
I didn't save you much time for our last question, Andy, but we'd be remiss if we didn't ask you quickly reflecting on Cal, right? With the season he's having, it's been something that fans and certainly our listeners always ask about. It's a fantastic season. What stood out to you most that you can remember when you guys were initially even scouting Cal?
The makeup. And, there's a lot of boxes that were being checked. The son of a very successful college baseball coach who grew up, in his dad's dugout. Just a mature person. You felt like you were talking to an adult immediately. And at the same time, he knew who he was, and he wasn't, he's not a people pleaser. He knows who he is, and he knows how he's going to run his race, and he's going to run it that way. I don't think anybody would raise their hand and say, yeah, I knew Cal was going to be challenging for an MVP this year.
Right. I saw 50 home runs.
I saw this coming, or platinum glove winner.
Right.
But once you see it, and I believe this about players, Cal's just having a good year. I don't think so. I think Cal is showing his true ability. And I don't really believe in hot streaks. I believe in the removal of mental clutter and showing the world who you really are and what you really can be. And I just couldn't be happier for him. I think he's just an awesome human being, and incredibly grateful that I've gotten to be around him and kind of had an up-close seat to his development and conversations that we've had in Modesto, or time we got to spend together during COVID at the alternate site in Tacoma. And I think the world of him. I think everybody in our organization does.
Always really cool to get that insight. Assistant GM for the Mariners, Andy McKay. Andy, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.